You're listening to the Wellness Evolution Community Podcast. I'm Dr. Christine Smith, and this is where your body becomes something you understand again, because symptoms aren't failures. They're your body's most honest attempt to protect you. Each episode, we decode those patterns with root cause physiology, nervous system insight, and metaphors that make your biology feel alive, understandable, and trustworthy. You are smart. Your body is designed to heal. Let's remember how together.
Today, I'm here with Dr. Christine Smith, someone who I've gotten to work with in our podcast studio for quite a while now. And I'm really excited to have you on and get to talk about some of these topics that we both really bond over.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I'm going to jump right in with a pretty straightforward question for you. When did you stop trying to fix the body and start collaborating with it?
That is a good question. Deep answer for a deep question. I think it's when I had an ego death.
Oh.
So it's when I realized that I was approaching my work from an old place of trauma, of wanting to save people and be the savior, to have purpose. And I think a lot of doctors probably go into their profession without realizing that shadow work. And when I was getting to the point of realizing that I had put myself in a position where I would inevitably pour out until I was empty on a continuous basis, I realized that it was coming from a self-focused place, even though it was disguised as a client-centered place. And that's when I realized as well that when you're trying to control things or control the body, you'll never actually heal. You have to listen to the body and respond to it and work with it in collaboration. And the only way to do that is to engage the client in the care. So if you are a doctor trying to save people, you're going to fail, because that client has to be engaged in their care in an energetic way, where they're focused on the outcome that they want, not the outcome that they're terrified of, and where they are engaged in their lifestyle, because you cannot out-supplement trauma, and where they're engaged in regular practices of sleeping and eating well and mindfulness techniques. I was just working on a patient report this morning, and she mentioned, like, one of my questions on the intake form is, are you open to mindfulness? And she says, yes, I know many techniques, I just don't use them. And the next question is, what is your stress level? And hers was a 10 out of 10. So this is someone where supplements can't be the answer, because it's about collaborating with the body.
And I know I'm guilty of that, knowing the techniques, hearing about them, but not using them. Yeah. Yeah. And I have had experience with being in treatment with the healthcare system and trying to treat a symptom, but not really address the root cause. And this exists, I see, both in physical health, but also in the world of mental health. And you and I have talked about this, where there's so many Band-Aids that we can put on the bullet hole of emotional trauma that inevitably is going to find its way out, even with medication. And yet we still have a system in place that prioritizes pills and a prescription. And those are necessary, like any medication is and supplements are. But yeah, these core fundamental practices that we can use within our bodies and within our surroundings, probably a quick checklist of things that if you start doing them, you'll probably see your symptoms change, whether it's mental or physical. I think if we can start sharing that with people, then not only will they may not need all of these medical interventions, but the ones that they are receiving are probably going to be more effective.
I could not agree more. And it's because our conventional system is set up in the savior model. It is something outside of you is needed to save you. And there are certain situations for that, like if you get in a terrible car accident, you have a bone poking out and you need it put back in place, then yes, something outside of you will definitely help. But when it comes to all these chronic illnesses or depression that people are dealing with, it is usually an imbalance on the inside, whether that's emotional or biochemical or microbial, like in the gut. There's a huge connection between the brain and the gut. Your gut is called the enteric nervous system. It has as many neurons as a cat's brain. You have more signals going from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut. So if your gut is disrupted from poor foods, it can also get disrupted from stress, because we are these ecosystems. We forget that we have trillions of other beings living inside of us that we are made up of. And if you take them out, we die. So it's this very interesting ecosystem that we exist as all the time. And I think if we can teach people how to maintain this vehicle that is made up of an ecosystem, that is where sustainable health comes in, rather than thinking that it's some pill that's going to fix your problem. They're even starting to review that a lot of, and you can take this out if you want, but that a lot of the mass shootings that have happened have been people who've been placed on SSRIs, especially in America. And I find that fascinating. And it's basically because they allow you to stop caring about consequence, and you just kind of stop caring about anything. And so it alleviates depression, but it doesn't really solve the root problem, because depression doesn't come from a lack of serotonin. Depression is more now theorized to be inflammation of the brain. And so the question is, where's the inflammation coming from? And you can have inflammatory foods and you can have inflammatory thoughts. And if you are constantly living in a state of bracing and constantly attached to your story of victimhood because you went through trauma in early life, which I understand, like, trauma is terrible. It's a horrible thing to go through. And everybody experiences it at some point. So it's, and there's different levels of it, but you can have two people that went through the same experience and one person comes out with PTSD and the other person doesn't. And it's because of the perception that they took. And Viktor Frankl wrote a whole book about this called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's a very impressive book about the mindset that he took while being a Holocaust survivor. And I think coming to understand that your perception has the biggest effect on your health compared to anything is probably the most important thing to understand. And that's for mental health, that's for autoimmune, that's for gut issues, that's for sleep issues, that's for hormone issues. And not to say that we don't also need to balance it with the physical body and the chemical body, but the mental body, the energetic body is the thing sending all the instructions to the other two.
Yeah, and that what you said brings me back to that analogy of two brothers of an alcoholic father emerge into the world as adults. One of them is homeless, drug addicted. One of them is wildly successful, healthy family. And you ask them, how did you end up here? What happened? And they say, well, my father was an alcoholic. And you can take it and you can let it be the thing that drives you to become better, or it can be the thing that keeps you in that victim mentality where then you go down that path yourself.
I think they even both say the same statement of, how could I not, right?
Right. And I also liked what you said about how we do sometimes live in a system that tells us that the solution is outside of us and not within us. I think at least personally, some of the best answers I've found to my own struggles have been when I've been sitting by myself or I've been out in nature and I have quiet and I can actually find that within me and tap into my own inner wisdom. And that's something that ChatGPT can't tell me or a doctor can't tell me. And it's more valuable because that's what creates a moment of learning too. Because then you've retrained yourself through this inner realization, and that has a ripple effect, not just on your mindset, but on your body and your nervous system. And that actually starts the cycle of healing when it comes from within, because no amount of external attempt to change you or heal you will do anything unless it resonates within.
Absolutely. And that's the core foundation of a lot of the subconscious work that I do is, like, you can say all the positive affirmations you want, But if it doesn't feel safe for you or it's not resonating with you, it's not going to land neurologically. And I think like you just brought up the concept of like, well, chat can't answer this for me. And I think this is actually an important thing to mention right now, because a lot of people are turning to AI for their therapy. And I'm going to orient them back towards trained therapists because I think having human connection is part of the benefit of working with a therapist. And yes, chat might be able to give you some answers and some insights, but it's also trained to appease you. And so unless you prompt it exactly correctly, it can actually create states of mentality that are not necessarily better.
Right.
There's even cases of like AI psychosis coming out right now from people being too affirmed in the stuff that they're doing.
Wow.
That's a thing. Yeah, this is literally a thing. And so I want to make people aware of this, that AI is best used when you have a large amount of context that you find from going within. And then when you speak that context into it and ask it to help reorganize the thoughts and maybe give a few insights from a specific perspective of someone trained in blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people are going to it and just asking it for answers. And if you put in a crappy question, you're going to get a crappy output. So it's the quality of your question is the quality of your answer. But I think there is benefit to interacting with humans, and community and human connection is the one thing that AI can't replace. And so I'm just going to remind people that like if you're struggling with depression, it's probably because you're struggling with connection.
Yeah. When you talked about AI, I had this one question that I asked to come to mind. It's like, oh, well, I've had this chicken in the fridge for 4 days. Can I still eat it? That's a good AI question. How do I approach this big life transition, and maybe like what supplements do I need for this, and this? Like that's probably not the best source for it. I mean, it can pull from credible sources. I found that you have to really train it to get what you want. But again, I think that sort of wisdom, that sort of intelligence is no replacement for inner intelligence. And that's what we have to return to really find the answers within.
Nothing is a replacement for inner intelligence. And I know like AI is getting smarter, and we're going to come into a world where it has its own consciousness, which I think is a whole other discussion that we could have. But I think realizing that nothing is smarter than your intelligence within is important. And I will say, for all the people also using AI as their doctor, like, yes, it can give you some good tips and tricks, and be careful because I have a lot of people coming in. They're like, well, AI told me this. And I'm like, well, actually, for your case, this isn't the right thing. And I have played with it as a doctor myself, and it gets stuff wrong. And like it will analyze labs wrong. It will pull the number wrong. It will, like, even if you upload the document directly, it'll pull the numbers wrong. It'll misread it. And it will miss stuff in a case because it has limited working memory. It will not make the same connections that a human makes when you're analyzing a full case, especially from a functional medicine perspective, because it's complicated. And you really have to prompt it right and ask it the right questions, or you have to give it all the context beforehand. So if I read through a lab and I share the results from like, hey, like I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, and I list everything verbally for it, then it can kind of analyze those results. But if I ask it to like look at my lab and pull something out of it, it'll miss stuff. And so just be aware that it is still worth having an actual person to analyze and look over your case.
Okay, I want to pivot here because like I've done before and I've seen many people do, it's so easy to go down the AI rabbit hole.
Like I said, that could be a whole other podcast.
I want to come back to this idea of autonomy and the ways that beliefs impact our body and illness and health. I've heard ideas like in mindfulness that people use language of like seat of awareness, where there's this self that is observing everything and has the power.
Metacognition.
Yeah. Okay. Metacognition, and has the power to, I guess, like control it as if it's sitting in a control room. And that's what mindfulness is taking a step backwards And in like Jungian psychology, I've heard it described as the king ruling over the subjects, which is all these elements of the body and the psyche, and finding that king energy, that which has authority and sovereignty over his kingdom or her kingdom. I guess my question for you is, how do you explain the mind's role and the nervous system's role in health and illness without turning it into a it's all in your head type of situation?
Sure. So metacognition is considered the highest form of intelligence. Your ability to observe your own thinking is difficult, and not everybody can do it. Actually, let me rephrase. Everybody can do it. People have not trained themselves how to do it. And that's what mindfulness is learning how to do that. But the ability to observe your own thoughts and be like, oh, I'm anxious right now. What made me anxious? Or, oh, I'm angry right now. What made me angry? All of a sudden separates yourself from the emotion. I've had conversations with people that speak other languages, and I find it fascinating how different languages say things differently. So like in English, we say, I am sad. It becomes an identity. In Spanish, you say, I have sadness. And in some languages in Europe, you say like, I am with sadness. And so I find speaking different languages gives you totally different perceptions on things. But English tends to identify with something. So I actually think it's quite important to be able to separate yourself. And I think you speak another language, right?
Yeah, I speak Hebrew.
Okay, so what would it be in Hebrew? Like, what's the...
The way you say, like, I'm depressed in Hebrew would translate to I am in a depression.
Great. So right there, you're not identifying with it, right? You're in a state, you're in a stage. And this is what I spend so much time trying to train people on when it comes to health. It's like your body is in a specific stage. It's in a state. We can get it out of this state, but we have to be aware of what state it's in. So most of my work, and like when I talk about health sovereignty and bringing people back to sovereignty in their health, is the ability to not only have metacognition for your thoughts, to be like, okay, well, what state is my mind in? But I guess metaphysiology cognition for your body, right? Like where's my physiology? So people think health is so hard, but I'm like, if your stomach hurts when you eat that thing, it means don't eat that thing. Like it's actually not that hard. If your head hurts when you do this thing, don't do that thing. Or like so many people, the biggest thing, people are like, oh, I drink 20 ounces of water a day. You need half your body weight in ounces of water per day to be like healthy and sustainable. Almost nobody does that. I have a big giant water bottle with me because if I drink 2 of these, I know that I've gotten my water for the day. And just for me, that helps me track it. But almost none of my patients drink enough water and then they wonder why they don't feel good. So I think just bringing awareness to this and then coming back to your question of like, how is the mind and the energetic field kind of a part of all this without it being it's in your head? So the water is important because we're electrical beings. That's how we conduct electrical signals neurologically. Your mind, we can look at it in a few ways, right? There's the physical brain, which is a bunch of neurons sending signals, and those signals go to your body and they change the chemistry in your body and your hormones and your neurotransmitters and all of that, all the signals to your cells. So then what incites that signal? That's the other component of the mind. That's the ethereal component of the mind. And if we kind of mix ethereal with science, we can go, the mind is the energetic component of, say, your life force or the soul or your essence or whatever word you want to have for it, the ether that you came from to come into this physical form. That is where the intention of things come from, right? Is this energetic intention of you. And that energy, we've talked about this before, it's kind of like your Wi-Fi field. And they have done magnetoelectroencephalography, which is basically using a magnet to measure thought waves without touching your head. They've even used magnets to change depression because they've triangulated the magnetic effect on certain regions of the brain to stimulate it. So this means that you were affected by fields, electromagnetic fields. This means that you produce your own electromagnetic field, which is why doing a podcast in person is very different than doing it over Zoom. Is like I can actually tune into you.
As with anything.
As with anything, right? Yeah, that's why community is so important. So if you're just sad and talking to your robot at home, like please go interact with some humans and find something that you like doing. So bringing it back to this concept of like you have this energetic self, the energetic part of the mind, that is, say, the intention, and then that intention directs the signaling of your neurons, and then the signaling of your neurons directs your chemistry, and then your chemistry directs your cells, and then your cells have a response. That's how the whole signaling thing works. So when we come back to it's in your head, but it's not, is like, yeah, it actually is coming from in your head. And if you have bad thought patterns of being like, oh, the world's out to get me, and I have had such a life of trauma and I've been such a victim to it all. And like, why me? And no one's here to help me. That is the chemistry that you're sending to your body. Your immune system is going to respond to that. And they have shown that there's huge effects on autoimmune from this because your immune system basically doesn't think that it's safe. So it hyper responds. And so if you can change the mental output from your mind, you actually change the chemistry in your body. And this is all the work that Dr. Joe Dispenza is doing. And he's shown people healing themselves from all kinds of diseases, getting up out of wheelchairs, healing themselves from cancer. And I put a post up on this once and somebody got really angry about it. I was like, this is like me trying to prove gravity to you. Like it already happened. We don't fully understand exactly how it's happening, but it's already happening. So there's no like debating it.
Right. And I don't know why it's such a crazy idea, because if I were to say something super negative, that the voice that's coming out is going through this microphone, through the wire, into the computer, which will then go out from my computer, airdropped onto my phone, out into the world on my social media site. And then other people will be negatively impacted by what my voice did into the microphone.
It's all frequency. We are frequency beings.
And that makes logical sense, right? We know the technology behind it. But for some reason, our own bodies, which you'd think we'd know better than some microphone outside of us, we have a hard time doing that with. I have a hard time doing that with. So I think this is important, though, because we could easily get into a conversation about how people try and take the power away from us and enforce these medications and treatments and a system that tries to sell us this.
And the system's well-intentioned. Like doctors that go into it are well-intentioned. They want to help people.
Right.
But the system itself is a little bit broken and kind of got purchased.
Right. But I think this is productive because it's okay that we can acknowledge that. But what's next? We can sit around all day complaining like you and I probably have done plenty about, well, what's wrong outside of us? But okay, then what, right? I forget who said it, but there was a Holocaust survivor, a woman, a student of Viktor Frankl, actually, who said that a victim says, why me? A survivor says, what next? So how do we become a what next kind of people?
Well, and let's touch on stages of development really quick so that we can have understanding for anybody, no matter where they're at. Because I see this all the time as a practitioner, right? People come into my office, they'll be looking for help. Some of them want it and are ready, and some of them think they want it and aren't ready. I had someone recently where I was working with him because he has an autoimmune condition. And we worked for a few months. His symptoms stopped. So he wanted to stop our appointments. And I said, okay, sure. But we haven't really finished what we were working on. And his response was, I don't want to fix everything. I just want to feel better. I was like, okay, that's where you're at. No problem. And, everyone's going to be at different stages in their journey. I put a post up recently about that concept of how your tendency to hold resentment as a people pleaser, which people do for safety. I get it. But it's not sustainable long-term for your immune system. And it primes you for autoimmune to live in a state of slight resentment because you're always people pleasing and not taking care of yourself and not replenishing. And I got a lot of angry comments on that post from people saying that it was really judgmental. And I was like, well, this is fascinating because I'm not judging you, you're judging you. Like, I was just in a podcast talking about a scientific fact, and they're like, this isn't fact, it's your opinion. And I was like, well, actually, there's a lot of scientific studies on it. Here's 4 books you can go read written by an MD. So I find it, but that's where they were in their developmental stage, right? Because the whole post was about shadow work. And for those who aren't familiar with shadow work, it's the stuff that's so incongruent with you that you don't want to look at it because it makes you kind of feel agitated. And like, if it agitates you, it's probably your shadow work. And whatever agitates you in other people is also your shadow work. And so it's like, well, why does that stuff agitate you? So I'm sure it agitated this person because what I wrote back was like, here's 4 books you can read. And also, if this triggered you, it might be something to look at. But at the same time,
I'm sure that was received.
I'm sure, yeah, we'll see how that went. But that's also kind of my job in office, right? Is it's like, if you just help someone stay in the same state that they're in, they're going to stay in the same state that they're in. If you offer them openings and reflections and steps forward, that's how they move out of that state. Some people are ready to and some people aren't, and that's okay. And whatever developmental stage you're in, it's okay. Like, we do need to go through a period of, we talked about this last time, of like, you need to go through a period of grief and bereavement of whatever you're dealing with. And, you know, there's multiple stages of grief, and there's denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance.
Something like that.
I believe I might have missed one, but you might go in that order, and you might go around that order. You might revisit some of them, but you technically need to go through all of them. And so like that person who was like, no, on the post, right? They're in denial. And then there's the bargaining. People are like, well, I'd exchange this for this. And then there's the anger, and like, you're like, somebody missed this? And why was I never told this? And why did this never happen? And you actually do need to go through anger to process something. Because like, I went through something earlier that really affected my health because of 1, environmental exposure to mold. And then 2, I was going through a very challenging emotional time. And everyone wanted me to feel better, and I just wanted to feel better. So I kind of skipped over the period of feeling angry because I just decided to go to forgiveness. And I later, like 3 or 4 years later, finally went on vacation for my first vacation, like 10 years. And that anger came up on my first week of vacation because it was the time that my body was relaxed and resourced enough and not distracted enough that I could actually process it. So that whole first week of vacation was shadow work. And then I was able to go and like enjoy nature and different things. But I had to move it through my system and actually feel the thing that everyone else had wanted me to not feel. My family was very supportive, but, you know, they just wanted me to feel better. And so every time I'd bring up frustration or anger, they'd orient me towards like more positive thinking. And so if someone comes into my office and they're like, I'm feeling this way and this way and this way, I don't immediately shift to, well, this is how you should feel. I just go, I'm really sorry. That is so hard. And we sit in it. And we sit in it together. And they're witnessed in their pain instead of trying to get them out of it. And then we have to move to something to move them through it and get them out of it. We can't just stay there, but it does have to be acknowledged first. So there's multiple stages of development. And then as people reach their later stages of development and the subconscious work that I do, this has been fascinating, right? Earlier stages of development, it's usually focused on something that's happening right now. As we go on later stages of development, it tends to go to early life and childhood. And as we get to the more advanced stages of development, sometimes we'll even work on like past life stuff.
Interesting. I think that's those stages of grief are relevant to that experience of growing up, because as a kid, I feel like we have this view of the world as very innocent and wholesome, and the world is taking care of us. And we feel that within our systems, the country we live in, and it feels perfect, right? We're taken care of, we're supported. And then you get to a point where maybe something happens in your health and you realize that, oh, this is a lot more challenging, and maybe not everything is set up for my success, or at least it feels that way. And that brings up grief. If you felt so taken care of, and then all of a sudden you're left to deal with your own illness. And how do you approach that? And I'm sure it does bring up grief. I also think that you have to do something with that energy. Right? Anger is energy. It's potential. Are you familiar with the Enneagram personality?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I call anger the change maker.
Yeah. So there's the three different triads. I won't get into the nerdy stuff of the system, but there's three ways that these energies show up in the Enneagram, and specifically with anger is that you can direct it outward, you can direct it inward, or you can push it down. And so for some people, like people pleasers, you might push it down or you might direct it at yourself. For others, you might never take responsibility for it and always push it outward.
What do they say? Anger directed inward is sadness.
Is that what they say?
Sometimes.
That feels true. I'm more of an inward type, where it's Enneagram 1, reformer, perfectionist, where it comes at me, versus my sister, she's a type 9, it gets pushed down. And my dad, type 8, it goes out, fire. So there's all these different types. And learning your tendency to direct anger in either of these directions can help you like harness it and channel it. And that's that king or queen energy, where you're sovereign over these energies and your emotions, and then you feel empowered by that. Right?
It's just learning how to respond over learning how to react.
Yeah.
I think there's a subtle difference between those two that people forget about. But when you have control over yourself, you respond. When you don't have control, you react.
Beautifully said. I have another question for you. As we've touched on health sovereignty, it's something that you and I have spoken about. If you had to define it in one sentence, how would you?
Health sovereignty is just understanding how your body works. People forgot that doctor means teacher. It comes from docere in Latin. It literally means teacher. No doctors teach anymore. They just treat people. And so instead, we should be teaching them how their body works. So when people come in and they have a symptom, I teach them where that symptom came from. And I teach them functional medicine, and I teach them the whole underlying of it. And I know some people come in and they're like, I just want to feel better. And I'm like, great, then I'm probably not your doctor. Like, that's okay. Like, we don't have to be a fit. But for me, like, I cannot operate in any other way than just teaching people how their body works, because it's the only way to get real sustainable results. So if you really want something fixed, that's how you actually fix it. If you want something patted on the shoulder, like, you can give it a supplement or a prescription, sure. But if you actually want to fix it, you have to explain to them how it works so that they can take control of it and have an understanding of it and know how to maintain it over time. Because it's not like you like heal your gut once and you're done. Like, it is an ongoing thing that we maintain. And so if I teach you, okay, like, yeah, go have champagne and wedding cake at your daughter's wedding, have a great time. And then the next day, take some gut supplements to heal the gut lining, don't have sugar and alcohol for the next few days, and make sure that you exercise, drink plenty of water, and like maybe go use the sauna. And so it's like, I can teach you all these life hacks of like, okay, well, if you're going to do this, then this. And I do that with pro athletes all the time, right? Because they're always on the road. So I'm like, okay, like, if you have a night game, I work with a lot of like MLB players. And so they have like nighttime games. And I didn't really realize what a hard time they have until I was talking to them. But it's rough. It's rough traveling on the road and then playing until 11 p.m. at night in like 100 degrees in July. That's a lot on your body. And so I prep them where it's like, okay, like if you have spring training, then we need to do adrenal support and these different things during spring training. And then as you come up and you're doing this, then we need to focus more on, amino acids and creatine. And then if you're going to, be stuck in a stadium and having not so great food, then we need to do this afterwards. And I want you to do this before bed. And I want you to do this when you wake up, and don't do the cold plunge right after this. Wait until this time. And so it's like, it sounds like a lot, but it's just learning how to respond. And it's just a language. It's like, once you learn the language, you're good. You don't have to go learn the language again. You just have to learn the language once.
Is there a moment for you where you felt that you were being spoken to in this language, where your body was communicating things that you had never even thought to address?
Yeah. I guess that kind of ties into the ego death. That was like, I learned this language because I had no other option. That was probably the hardest time of my life. And it's when And like I've, had early life experiences that were also challenging, and I'm sure a lot of it stacked into this time where a lot of it was just coming to the precipice of awareness to be dealt with, on top of having an environmental exposure, chaos in the world, and chaos in relationships. And my body basically became allergic to everything. And I chose to not go the conventional route because this was also like basically during 2020. And I was a little intimidated to go into a hospital at that time. And I was afraid that the only answer they would have for me would be a symptom. And like I was running all my own labs. So like I was running more labs than they would have run. So like I knew what was going on, or to the best of my ability. But basically it was coming up like I was having like a tendency towards autoimmune, right? Like it was almost looking like lupus kind of thing. And I got scared that it might be that. But then I ran all my panels and it was like something called ANA, which is basically a marker that says, do you have an immune reaction to your own DNA, was coming up, but the actual markers for lupus weren't coming up. So it was basically like I was in the space before it, right? And this is where I love to catch people. And so like that client that's like, well, I don't want to fix everything. I just want to feel better. I'm like, okay, well, we're catching you right before this turns into a thing, but do your thing, man. And so I like to catch people in that space when they're starting to have a problem and then bring them back to a state of balance, because that is health sustainability. That's health sovereignty. And if you can learn how to do this throughout your life will last a lot longer and you'll have a lot more quality to your life. And this is how we prevent things like dementia, is we take care of the brain the whole way through. And if you're inflamed in your body, you're probably inflamed in your brain. And I was struggling with major depression during this time. I didn't really know about the mold exposure when I was doing these labs and stuff, but I was becoming allergic to everything. I think 1, because of the mold, but then 2, because of my perception of going through that grief of like the world is not as predictable as you want it to be, as we think it might be in childhood. I do want to think that it's benevolent, right? I think ultimately the universe is neutral and benevolent. Universal energy as a whole. It's just, it thinks a lot bigger than you and your life, like you are a cell in an organism. And so you can't take it personally. But at the time I was taking it really personally because I was very afraid of everything that was going on.
It's hard not to.
It was hard not to. Yeah. And, but I went through this whole kind of ego death experience, and was working with some really talented therapists that helped me kind of come up into this place of seeing the bigger picture. And then I'd like come down into all the stuff I was dealing with, which is also like early family patterns and processing a family death. And so there's a lot of grief going on at the time. And I was struggling because I couldn't figure out where to place my trust. And I was like, well, I can't place it in myself because I make wrong decisions. And I can't place it in other people because they're allowed to prioritize themselves. So I can't fully trust their decisions all the time. And I can't place it in the universe because it's chaotic and unpredictable. Like, where the heck do I place it? So I decided the only rock solid place to place my trust is in my ability to get back up and figure it out. So if you place your trust in your own resiliency, that is the one place that you can place it, because you cannot pretend that everything is always going to be okay. And you can't pretend that you can project and predict enough to make everything be okay. And I think the people that try to do that get stuck in a state of catastrophizing, and they live their whole life in fight or flight, and they prime their body for illness, and they have a ton of health issues. So you just have to accept that you can't control a lot of things, and you can't project enough to protect yourself from everything. And if you do, you're going to be inhibiting yourself from living a lot of life. So I am more the person that's had enough death in my life that I look at it as not this terrifying thing. I find the United States especially has this perspective on death where we're all very afraid of it, versus other countries don't really look at it that way. It is just part of a life cycle, and other countries see it as an honor. And I think if you're always hiding from life in order to avoid that, then you miss out on the benefit of being alive. And so, not that I'm saying like go and take a bunch of unreasonable risks. I just mean like live your life to the best of your ability and accept that Scary things are inevitable and you'll deal with them when they come up. But if you sit there in your basement trying to predict everything and never going out or doing anything, then they've already happened to you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that's very personal and deep, but I think people connect to stories more than ideas. And so I hope other people can really connect to that story. I did. And what you said at the end about actually living your life, you can take health as well to that extreme where you're so focused on it and you think you can fix everything. Even that idea of trusting yourself to fix everything, that you miss out. I know there was a period for me where I was so hyper fixated on health that I wasn't letting myself enjoy certain things. My routine, my regimen was down to the minute, down to the last gram or calorie or whatever it was.
It's actually an eating disorder. It's called orthorexia. It's perfectionism to an unhealthy state.
Well, let's just say that the bodybuilding community I was in when I was 17 years old that really got me out of a hard place. It also kind of had that mindset of get down to 5% body fat and do all of these things so that you can be at peak performance as an individual, as a man.
And they have their place. It got you out of a challenging place and got you into a better one. Fantastic. Yeah. Love that. Everything has its role. The one thing I'll add in for anybody listening, because usually people are seeking something or they're seeking someone, and this goes back to the whole sovereignty thing. I truly believe that there are no gurus. Like, follow your inner self. You can learn from gurus and you can integrate their wisdom, but make sure that you integrate it and see what it actually means to you.
Right. Yeah. And not to get too deep into the topic of religion, but, and then here we go. I find that I've seen that some religions, there's this person that you have to look up to for wisdom, and it's almost like they become like an all-knowing figure. But what I love about my tradition, Judaism in particular, is that in the story of, God's revelation to the people at Mount Sinai, it wasn't that Moses went to the mountaintop and heard the truth and then came down and told it. It was something that was revealed to the masses, to everyone at once. That there's this idea that our souls were all there. And whether you take it literally or not, what that represents is that we as individuals, as a collective, all have the power to receive revelation, whether it's from within, from without, wherever we feel that it is truth, capital T, truth, speaking to us. That's within our power to realize, not some guru.
I could not agree with you more. And I support all religions. I support all spiritualities. I support all belief systems. If it connects you to something greater than yourself, to a point where you feel supported and realize that this life is about more than you, great. If you're so attached to it that you cannot feel complete unless you have that story, then maybe review how you're using it. And I think if you can just tap into it as an energy and an essence and realize that you are a part of that essence and it is a part of you, however you identify with it, that's great. Because as soon as you've separated yourself from it so that you're seeing source outside yourself, you're now separate from source.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think as long as you understand that you are source and source is within you, that is where the healing comes from. Because it's really interesting in Joe Dispenza's work, they're still looking at this, but they're finding it fascinating, where it's like the meditations that help people heal the most is when you basically forget about your existence and your body and you sit in a place of nothingness and you connect to everything in a place of nothing. That's what heals people. So it's basically like returning to source. Versus if you try to direct things and you have I and you have an internal statement of I and this body, it's not as effective. But when you go into that place of nothingness and you can actually let yourself separate and disintegrate into the ether, that is actually where the healing occurs.
And I think that's why sleep is so healing, because when we're awake, we're aware of our thoughts, our emotions, body, our surroundings, sensations, people, etc. When we're dreaming, we're conscious of our dreams. But when we're not dreaming and we're sleeping, we're conscious of nothing.
It's a deep state of repair.
Yeah.
So people who are like, I sleep 4 hours a night and I'm tired all the time, you just answered your own question. So it's like, I think sleeping is hugely important for healing anything, including depression.
Yeah, I love this conversation. And I think that it's something I wish I could have shared with myself at least years ago when I was just trying to figure out my own health journey. And, I'm very grateful. I haven't had any major health issues, but more so have wanted to optimize my living experience. And I, like you said, there's an extreme to health. And for me, that was what I was doing in the gym and in my nutrition and whatnot. And it was detracted from my quality of life. Now it's different. And I wish that, more people, we could help them catch it before they go too far down in either direction, finding that balance.
Well, and sometimes we have to swing that pendulum, right? So it's like we have to go to the far end of health and different things where it's like maybe we're overworking out or we're over perfectionistic about our food. And then we realize that, and the metacognition comes in of like, oh, I'm being a little hypercritical on myself. Okay, how can I fix this?
Right.
And then you start to come back to that middle ground. But if you were all the way at the other end of the spectrum before where you weren't doing anything for your health, then it's finding what works for you. And I will say, going through the journey of being allergic to everything and having like basically total adrenal failure at that time and living in a state of fight or flight, it was really interesting because my body could not tolerate what it had tolerated previously. So I couldn't go and work out like I had worked out for years, and I couldn't eat what I had eaten for years that worked before, and all of a sudden it wasn't working. I was like, why is this not working anymore? And so it was this very slow recovery of coming back to being able to like weightlift or being able to do a HIIT class and listening to my body in the process. From like, okay, if I'm doing a high intensity class and I am dizzy and lightheaded, I am not in the right state for this class.
Mm-hmm.
And I educate clients on that. So that comes back to just like, okay, well, maybe it's just not the day for it. It's not that you can't ever do it. It's just that you're not resourced today.
Yeah.
And teaching people to feel into that, or bringing awareness to depression and stuff, right? Like I get depressed when I overeat and I overconsume sugar, and it takes 3 days to kick in. It took me 10 years to figure that out. And so like the other day I just did a fast because I could feel that happening in my body where I was like, why am I so like irritable? And like this just like I've just felt off and my perception is off and I'm moody and I'm not looking at my life right. Like, let me just see if I can clear my system. Now I was resourced enough this time to fast. I tried to do the same when I was allergic to everything, and that made me worse because it tanked my adrenals. So this is why I think it can be helpful of like working with a practitioner to be like, well, what state am I in? What's right for me right now? Because you can ask the internet those questions and it doesn't actually know what state you're in. So that's the context that must be given first, and why you have to take a good history. And I can't tell you what crappy histories most doctors take.
This all brings me to another question for you.
Sure.
Which is, how can we use parts work to help us build better communication and start to understand that language of what's going on within us, not just in therapy, but also within like the world of like medicine and physical health?
Ooh, great question. Okay. So let's just break a paradigm for people right now. People are afraid of shadow work and they're afraid of stuff like parts work because they're afraid of shame and because they don't want to feel shame. And I'm just going to let you know that shame is probably one of the most important emotions that you have. You can listen to Brené Brown on this. She does a ton of research on it. You should be curious about shame because shame really has nothing to do with you. Shame is someone else's projection onto you, making you think that there's something wrong with you. And that can be a parent's projection. It can be an authority figure. It can be society's. It can be a friend's. It can be a partner's. It can be whatever. But shame is the idea of I am wrong. And guilt is the idea of I've done something wrong. If you are thinking I am wrong, that's not true. Like, we all came into this world innocent. And so there's nothing actually wrong with you, but there might be guilt somewhere where you feel like something's wrong with you. But guilt and shame, instead of being avoidant of them, which is where you'll never grow, instead be curious about them. And so parts work is a way to bring up these different parts of ourselves that are having certain emotions. And, you know, for people who've never heard of this stuff before, I mean, parts work is used in a lot of different subconscious modalities. A common one that's known as neurolinguistic programming. Lots of professionals do this, like Tony Robbins and other people. But basically, it's a way of understanding an inner part of yourself and reparenting it to integrate it. Because a lot of the time, if we go through something challenging, we will dissociate from that part. And the dissociation itself leaves it unprocessed. So I have a gal, like a patient who's been dealing with a lot of illness and sickness. And she's been doing all of this stuff and nothing's really been helping. I started doing parts work with her and she feels the best that she's felt in a really long time. And so it's because she had all this stagnant energy stuck in her system and unprocessed emotion that was just driving everything. Because again, your emotions have cellular mechanisms. They have molecular components. There's a whole book about it called The Molecules of Emotion, written by Dr. Candace Pert. And she describes how your immune system has receptors for these emotional peptides. And if your emotions are sitting on the back burner unprocessed, then you basically have sand in this very delicate grandfather clock that is your body. So when we do parts work, it can look something like, so I had a gentleman come in. I only saw him once because it was a really new kind of therapy for him, but it really helped him. And he's a widower. So he had his wife pass and he has 2 kids. And he was really, really struggling with this. And so when he came in, we were doing some parts work, which is basically like a guided meditation, right? It's like light hypnosis, but you're fully aware. You can leave the room at any time, do whatever you want. But it's just getting the brain into a meditative state so that we can enter into like a programming state for the neurology. And we were talking with this part of him that was feeling this grief. And I was like, okay, well, if this part had some kind of personification, how does this come across in your mind? And he's like, it feels like a ball of knotted yarn. And I was like, okay, great. Like, we're, in the forest in his mind. I was like, can we take some of the like pine needles and just start kind of like picking apart this knot? And so we start kind of pulling apart this knot and then like coming across like another section. And then in his mind, his son was there. And I was like, okay, can your son help you? And by the end of this, we had both of his kids there and in his mind, his wife there helping to untangle this part of himself that was feeling grief. And then we took this very nice yarn and we wrapped it around this tree that was in his favorite place and tied it with a bow where he could come and visit it whenever he wanted. But after he left, he felt so much better. We didn't touch on any of the story, but he got to have this very nice, energetic processing with his entire family, including a deceased loved one in his mind, to untangle this state of grief that he'd been locked up in. And that is one way of doing parts work. There's a million ways of doing parts work. I have a teacher and she calls it a parts party, right? You can have a party between your parts in your mind where you have like 3 parts talking to each other and helping each other out at the same time. And I did that with the woman who's been really struggling with her health. And, one of the parts was a boundary. One of the parts was her heart. And another part was the one that had been carrying all the burden. And so they all ended up pitching in and chiming in to help. And I even did this process with my mentor. And one of my parts came up as like the side of me in high school that was kind of like the punky goth chick. And
no way.
Oh yeah, way. And she was like, oh, that's your boundaries person. I was like, oh, fascinating. I'd never seen it that way. But I was too nice as a teenager, right? I needed to have this part of me that like had some kind of boundary. Mm-hmm. And but I hadn't never seen it that way until we were having a conversation with this part of me in my mind.
Well, that's great because we're complicated people who have more than one story within us. And that's something that could be confusing and can be anxiety provoking, but it can also be curious.
Yep.
So this is why I love like working with like different archetypes, because I can find them within me. Not that it's me per se, but that there's just this energy of like a character of sorts that exists within humanity, within the world, that is playing through me and is showing up through me. So it could be like the archetype of this goth chick, right?
Yeah.
I was just saying to my friend the other day, we were just like reminiscing on old times, and I was comparing different like phases that I went through. And he's like, dude, you've had a lot of different eras. I'm like, yeah, I have, but I think that's how it should be. And you can always tap into those different like characters that you embody, but giving everything within you a seat at the table.
Yes.
That is the most important thing, because if something feels like it won't have a seat at the table, it's like a little baby. It'll cry, kick, scream, and show up within you. It'll force itself to the table without you even wanting it there.
Well, and the benefit of stuff like parts work over traditional talk therapy, which I still love traditional therapy, especially with good therapists. I think finding a good therapist is a shopping game. So don't be afraid to go shopping to find someone that you resonate with. But I think the difference of doing something like parts work and subconscious work is that the story doesn't matter anymore. And so many people get so locked up in their story, and they have to validate it or figure out like what was right or who was at fault or whatever. It doesn't really matter, because reality is what happened inside of you. And you can be a little kid in a grocery store and have the experience of getting lost and not being able to find your parent and feeling like they completely abandoned you and that the world has betrayed you. And that's the experience that you had as a 4-year-old, even though your mom was like in the dairy aisle, right? So it's like, it's not like it was bad parenting, but inside of this little kid's experience, it was. So this is where people can get in a paradox where it's like the parent's story is fine. They weren't necessarily like a horrible parent, just an imperfect human doing their best, which parenting's hard, let's be real. But then for the kid, they had this, like every kid experiences trauma in some way because at some point they misinterpreted the situation, but their internal reality was real. So that's what parts work does, is it works with the internal reality of it. And it helps it be resolved without having to logic it out with the story. And the whole idea of parts work is you like acknowledge it, you figure out what's needed, you help it to feel safe, and then you ask it what it would do if it was no longer on this duty, and then you give it an alternative job. Because you can't get rid of these parts of yourself, but you can assign them new tasks and you can process them. And as soon as we do that, we're no longer dissociated. So it's basically you create more wholeness by integrating fragmented parts of the self that have been dissociated from.
This podcast is sponsored by Metacognition, everyone. Really, that's like the center. That's the center of what we're talking about here. It comes through practice.
And as you create that wholeness, you have more energy to heal. So if all your energy is outside of you, because if you're constantly focused on everybody else and not focused on your own needs, that's a trauma response. You're never going to have the energy inside of you to heal because it's outward.
So I have one closing question for you. What is a sign that someone is actually healing that isn't just a disappearing of a symptom?
They're feeling their feelings, which sometimes sucks, but you have to feel to heal. And so a lot of people will start to feel stuff, or they'll start to feel symptoms, and they feel like the key to health is to have no symptoms. That's not true. The key to health is to understand what your symptoms mean and how to respond to them. But if you can't feel them because you've numbed them out, either by dissociating or with drugs, then you're not going to be able to heal because you don't have the signal.
Amazing. Do you have any questions for me before we wrap up here?
What has been your greatest learning in your own journey or your own piece of shadow work that transformed you?
I feel like the greatest skill that I've developed in my own shadow work is trying to see my life within the framework of the hero's journey, not to cling to it, but kind of like I said, to allow these different stories and archetypes to play through me and to just watch that and let it be, even in shame, to just acknowledge whatever shameful character is at play. That to me helps me tell a more beautiful story, one where I can then write the ending to it, whatever situation I'm going through or whatever stage of life I'm going through. Yeah, that's been super helpful for me. And I feel that in my own work one day, when I become a therapist, that's something I want to really help people with, because I think it's missing. And I think we demonize these parts of ourselves that just want to be held. And that can be done through being a good storyteller. I like viewing the world through art and poetry, and it's a very poetic way of looking at the world, but it's also something that's very real, because we're not the first people to do this. There's been many people before us, and stories are consistent, whether it's fairy tales or lived experiences of people in the past. We've gone through the motion of going from a young person, growing into ourselves, gathering wisdom, giving back, and then fading out of existence. And that's consistent with every human experience. So that to me has been the biggest thing. And it connects me to something bigger. Spirituality and my own connection to God and my Judaism is a huge part that's helped me. But I'd say in the most generic lens, the hero's journey work has been huge for me.
I love that answer. And I guess if I were to expand with my own response to that question as like a culmination with yours,
Yeah.
I think what you just said is basically staying in authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And they've shown that authenticity is the most powerful emotion. And I'd say my deepest shadow work was realizing that minimizing parts of myself to make other people happy when it made me unhappy was actually a form of lying and being manipulative. So people pleasing is actually manipulative, even though it's usually a way of staying safe. And if you lie to people about your needs and who you are and what you want and your actual feelings, you're never going to have real relationships. So I think that's my greatest shadow learning, was you must be authentic and truthful to have deep, meaningful relationships.
Because you can't give anything to anyone if you're not being honest with them. That's the ultimate form of giving, even though honesty can be brutal sometimes.
And you're tricking them about who you are. So they also have the right to choose what relationships to be in. And if you're not being honest and you're carrying quiet resentment from that, then that's not fair to the people you're interacting with, as much as it's not fair to you.
I think that we'll wrap up here. I think that is kind of like a shadow side to the feminine in a way, which is like this giving figure. Enneagram 2, the helper. So a lot of women are Enneagram 2s. My girlfriend's an Enneagram 2. And so there's this work of not giving to the point where I'm storing up all these giving credits, right? Where then I can just use it in a manipulative way. And then also not being inauthentic about what I need, about what will fulfill me so that I can actually show up in the relationship. I think that's huge. And I struggle with that sometimes as well. So I'm glad you said it.
Well, I think it's important for the masculine too, because this is why men need to learn emotional intelligence, because otherwise they just sit and stay in a place of anger.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me. I want to give you just a quick sec to talk about the community that you're launching.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If anybody wants support with this, because we went very deep, we talked about a lot, and I know it can be a lot to navigate on your own, but not everybody's ready to like do a one-to-one appointment, or those can be expensive. I created a community for exactly this called Wellness Evolution Community. It's just wellnessevolutioncommunity.com. It's a place where you can come to learn about this kind of stuff and this kind of physiology. It's a place where I bring people like you on to speak at a deeper level about these things, where we can have live discussions about it and Q&As. And then there's also a ton of recorded content that people can watch so that they can start their own journey at their own pace and really learn how to take their health sovereignty back by truly understanding how their body works, because it's a process. It's a lifelong process. And You are living in this vehicle every moment of every day. So I personally think you should understand how it works.
Amazing. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, tune in for more videos. If you enjoyed this podcast, reach out to me. I'd love to talk. I'm looking for more people to have on the show. I love having these conversations. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and reclaiming your health sovereignty. If you feel ready for deeper guidance and reconnecting to your inner intelligence and finally not going the journey alone, I created the Wellness Evolution community for that exact purpose, for you. It is a place rooted in education, foundational physiology, and community support where you can learn to trust your body again. Visit www.wellnessevolutioncommunity.com for a free quiz to find out where your body is at in your healing stages.